So I love this section here. John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17. John 13, 1 through 17. By the way, when you pick up in John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17, this is the beginning section of what is commonly called the upper room discourse. The upper room discourse. If you read John chapters 13 through 17, that whole section is one discourse by Jesus. It is one discourse. It is Jesus in the upper room with the disciples. It is Jesus in the upper room with the disciples. It is on the night before He is betrayed, in which He is betrayed by Judas in the Garden of Gethsemane, in which He is handed over and eventually crucified. And it's literally hours before He goes to the cross. Now keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. So the things that we're going to consider here in this John chapter 13 passage must be kept in mind because Jesus is under great pressure. Under great pressure. And yet He is going to act in such a way that He is going to not be consumed with the pressure of the situation. He's not going to be consumed with thoughts of Himself and what He's going to be facing, which is His own death on the cross. A very difficult thing to face. Imagine if we knew that we were going to be crucified, beaten, a crown of thorns twisted upon our head, and that we were going to have nails driven through our hands and feet and be placed upon a cross within 18 hours. Where would our thoughts be? Probably, how are we going to face this difficult thing? And yet Jesus is so focused, He's so disciplined, He's so thinking of others and not Himself, that when you read John chapters 13 through 17, He's so focused on what He has to say for His friends who are in the room. Okay? And He wants to have such a display of love for them. And that's what we're going to consider here. And this is why this is such a tremendous passage. Now, one thing you don't get from John chapter 13 here is that passage from over in Luke 22:24, and I'll read it very quickly. It says, "And there arose also a dispute among them," that is the disciples, "as to which of them was regarded as the greatest." As to which of them was regarded as the greatest. So in the upper room, while they're seated around the table and Jesus is there with them, there is a dispute that erupts among the disciples there as to which of them is the greatest. Now, that's pretty self-centered, isn't it? That's pretty self-centered, right? Now, do Christians ever fight about such little things like that? Do they ever fight about who's the greatest among them? Or who's the greatest theologian out there? Or do they ever fight about little things like that? Well, so here's Jesus, and He's seated at the table, and the disciples are fighting amongst themselves. They're having an argument as to who is the greatest among them. And it's in the context of this debate that these disciples are having amongst themselves that Jesus then gives this object lesson. So pick up with me in John 13:1. It says, now in John 13:1, it says, "Now before the feast of the Passover." Now I want to point out something here, that on this night when Jesus is in the upper room, please keep in mind that Jesus is a wanted man. He is a wanted man. He is wanted by the leadership of Israel and by the people of Jerusalem because they're wanting Him. They're wanting Him to try Him illegally and to crucify Him. So at this point, Jesus is the most wanted man in Jerusalem at this time. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that His hour had come, that He should depart out of this world to the Father. And that's very striking because Jesus knew, He didn't guess, He knew that His hour had come. And what was that hour? That He should depart out of this world to the Father. So Jesus here knows that He's going to leave the world. He's aware that He's going to the cross as a willing sacrifice. Jesus was never a blind victim. He was never a blind victim of the things that were coming upon Him. But He was a willing sacrifice. And that phrase, knowing that His hour had come. I have a few verses below where if you read earlier in the Gospel of John, like John 2:4, Jesus, when He found Himself in a situation, He made the comment, He said, "My hour has not yet come." My hour has not yet come. And that is a specific reference to the future time when He knew He was going to the cross. And in John 7:30, John writes, he says, His hour had not yet come. Because everything was in anticipation of the cross, wasn't it? Everything was in anticipation of the cross. And in John 8:20, again it says, His hour had not yet come. His hour had not yet come. But by the time you get to John 12:23, By the time you get to John 12:23, Jesus knew he had been rejected by the leadership of Israel and the majority of people in Israel. And so he comes to this point to where he knows that he is on the threshold of facing the cross. And what does he say in John 12:23? He says, the hour has come for what? For the Son of Man to be what? Glorified. Now what's he talking about? He's talking about the cross. He's talking about the crucifixion. But isn't that an interesting choice of language that he says there? He doesn't say that the hour has come for the Son of Man to be crucified. He says the hour has come for the Son of Man to be what? Glorified. So isn't that interesting how he thinks about the cross? Isn't it? And how do we think about trials? How do we think about difficult situations? How do we think about difficult situations? Do we think of them as oh, here comes this difficult trial of suffering? Or do we see it as an opportunity to glorify the Lord? Well, what does 1 Corinthians 10 tell us? That whatsoever you do it as what? Unto the glory of God. Right? Whatever you do it as unto the glory of God. And isn't that a choice that we make? And here Jesus says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And in John 12:27, now my soul has become troubled. And certainly it was. He knows he's going to the cross. Jesus is a fully human, right? He is the Son of God, but he's fully human. And he says, now my soul has become troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this very purpose I came to this hour. And here Jesus knows that he has a personal sense of destiny. Jesus knows that he has a personal sense of destiny. And that's very important for even the believer to understand. Because listen, your coming into this world was not an accident. And the life that you have and the calling that you have by the Lord himself who has called you to be his own, it's not an accident. And so here Jesus has this personal sense of destiny. And he says, for this purpose I came to this hour. And here we have the passage we're picking up with in John 13:1. Jesus knowing that his hour has come. And then again the statement in John 17:1, Father, the hour has come. So Jesus knows. He knows what time of day it is. He knows what time it is in his life. And that he's literally hours from the cross. He knows that. And so again in John 13:1, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus being the most wanted man in Jerusalem, and Jesus knowing that his hour had come, that he should depart out of this world, aware again that he's going to the cross as a willing sacrifice, it says that he loved his own who were in the world. He loved his own who were in the world. And what does it say? That he loved them to the end. That he loved them to the end. Now if you read John chapters 1 through 12, you will find that there are two words that Jesus uses more than any other words in those 12 chapters. He uses the words truth and light more than any other words. But in John chapters 13 through 17, there is a shift in the language that Jesus uses. And he uses the word love 31 times in those chapters. Love is the word he uses 31 times. Now that says a lot, doesn't it? Because in the upper room, where are his thoughts? What is he thinking about? Here he is. He's literally 18 hours from the cross, from being betrayed by a man who is seated near him. And where are his thoughts? With the men who are with him. And the fact that there is this shift, and it says, John says, having loved his own who were in the world, that he loved them to the end. And I would argue, and I've given you 3 points here, that Jesus loved his disciples, as we're about to see, by humble example. By humble example. That he loved them by teaching. Because when you read John chapters 13 through 17, Jesus taught them. He taught them. He taught them about what the Holy Spirit was going to do with them from the day of Pentecost onward. He taught them many truths about the coming future dispensation of the church age. He taught them many things. And so he loved them by teaching them and revealing to them the truths about God, about the Holy Spirit, about things to come. Things that were going to come upon them in the future. Trials that they would face. So he loved them by teaching them. And then in John chapters 18 and 19, I would argue that he loved them by dying as their substitute. Because when he went to the cross, he bore the sin that was theirs. When he went to the cross, for whose sin did he die? Exactly, it wasn't his own. He was sinless. And he went to the cross and he died in our place. He bore the wrath of God that rightfully belongs to us. The just for the unjust. The innocent for the guilty. Right? For God so what? Loved the world that He gave. What was it that He gave? His Son. And the Son willingly went. Willingly went.